you don't need to be strong for anybody, because in the process of grieving, there is no such thing as being strong. You grieve the way you grieve. Everybody's situation is different, but you also have to be careful of what you're teaching.
In the bed, and she could sense like her spirit leaving her body, and she said she felt, she's like, I can't even put into words how good I felt. It's like I just felt so overwhelmingly good. It was bright. It was so bright. She was like, it was beyond white, the color that I saw, and how good I felt and how loved I felt going toward this light. So what would you say grief is?
For me, I'm usually just, it's the normal reaction
Yeah, yeah,
to any unexpected loss.
yeah, yeah.
And sometimes expected loss is not always
And grief,
unexpected.
and grief is also in the moment too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A lot of the people who I do speak to, I think the problem that most of them have is they don't identifying grief and kind of planning how to grieve
Mhm,
is two different things. And by the time they get to us, we kind of walking them through the process of both.
mhm.
Um, I think most of them don't want to until they get to a place where the feeling is overwhelming and they don't understand what's happening.
Mhm.
And then they have to get to a process to understand that they are grieving, that this is natural. And then we get to that place and then try to take them through the process.
But you mentioned planning how to grieve. How do you plan how to grieve?
Well, you don't necessarily plan to grieve, but you expect to grieve. Everybody, at some point in their life, is going to pass away. We just don't expect it at times, but you have to know that it's coming, and and as long as something is expected, I believe you can plan for it. Most of the time, when it comes to death, we know it's going to happen, but we don't expect it to happen,
Mhm.
and that's challenging. But I think for most people, they only find themselves there when they're dealing with elderly people. So the trauma of grief is extra
Mhm.
when you get to a point where children, people in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s,
Mhm.
people you didn't expect to. So you definitely don't plan that, but it should be something that's expected.
So you were talking about expecting to grieve. At some point, you come to a place where you expect to grieve.
Hmm.
So I know with my situation, with both my mom and dad being sick with cancer, and my mom dying of cancer first, from the outside looking in with everybody else, they expected her to die. I didn't expect her to die, so I wasn't in a place to expect to grieve.
Okay.
And even being in a position where I knew people were going to die, I never thought, oh, it's going to come a time where I have to expect to grieve. Like, what does that even look like?
You remember the conversation we had, and
Where you were like preparing me for the what ifs.
hmm
In the back of my mind, I'm like, this man don't know what he talking about. Let me go on with the plan. Yeah, you were preparing me for the what if, because my what if is my mom's going to be fine
hmm
because of all the healing work that we're doing. My what if is there's no way she'll die.
okay,
Yet, when she did transition, the fact that you put those little nuggets in my head, the what if her healing is not here? What if her healing is in her death?
hmm
But the fact that you put that little nugget in my realm or in my mind space, it stuck with me and it helped me a little bit
okay.
through the process. And it helped me, I wouldn't say accept her death at the time, it just helped me breathe,
Okay.
if that's a definition of what I was feeling at the time.
Well, that's kind of why I said what I said. Because the difference is you weren't expecting to grieve because you didn't expect it to go or have a different outcome.
Right.
What I was asking was, well, what if it doesn't go the way you plan and something unexpected happens based on your expectations? And that's the what if piece of it. And I don't believe you can really start to grieve
Mm-hmm.
until you start to think about that. Far too often, it's a shock when it doesn't. And then we feel like we're in this bubble. We don't understand. It's a dream. And I wanted you to start to contemplate, what if she's not? here? What if it doesn't go the way I expected it to go? What do I do? How am I going to feel? And I believe some of those emotions and stuff start to come up, or we have to deal with those emotions. And if we don't, then we're always going to be stuck in a place.
Do you remember some of my responses at that time?
Um, yes,
Could you
you.
tell me? Because I don't remember.
I remember sitting, and you were sharing with me. People were praying. You were sharing with me what people were saying and how she was going to be healed. And I'm a person of faith, and so I do believe that. But I also know that we don't make all those decisions, and some of those decisions is I don't want to say above my pay grade, but it's somebody that sits high and looks low. And so when I said to you, well, what if? There was two reasons I said that to you. The reality of it is we're going to grieve, um, and we're going to deal with grief, or grief is going to deal with us. And so we don't really have a choice. What I also wanted to do was, there's a challenge sometimes of your faithfulness, where you stand, the relationships with these people, that I wanted it to come across that they mean well, but they don't know for a fact.
Hmm.
So that was number one. And then after I shared it with you, you gave me this look like, what if? And I said, well, what if she doesn't? You paused for a moment and you started to cry. But somewhere in you, I believe that question was there, and I was asking a question that you wanted to stop asking yourself. Um, and so I remember you cried a little bit, and then you went on your way. But I believe that at that point you start to go, yeah, what am I going to do without? Because when I say deal with the grief piece of it, it's more than just losing her. It's everything that comes with losing her. The person I talk to, I spend time with, the person that's always got my back. Whatever activities you did together, all of that's impacted now.
Hmm.
And so Monday through Friday, the weekends, everything looks different once this individual is gone. And I needed you to start to think about, well, what am I going to do? And for me, it's more than just the process of getting over. People go in time. I don't agree with that. I don't think time heals anything. I think intentions heals.
Exactly.
And so you have some people who've been grieving, and they go, I've been grieving my mom for 15 years,
Yeah.
but they really haven't been intentional
Yeah.
about anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I say deal with grief, I mean just get into a place intentionally, like, well, what does my life look like once this person? What does my life look like once
Hmm.
this job? What does my life look like
Hmm.
once this marriage is over?
And the crazy thing is, I never got the opportunity to even think that far ahead because, like I said, both my mom and dad had cancer at the same time.
Mhm.
So I really didn't even get an opportunity to grieve until maybe 3 years after my mom's death to really like that ugly, deep down cry.
Okay.
It wasn't until 3 years following because right after my mom died, I had to shift into now I gotta make sure my dad doesn't die. That was my mindset. I gotta make sure my dad does not die. This doesn't happen to my dad too, because it was devastating. It was unbelievable. But looking back, when I would see the photos and the pictures, it looked like death's door was right there.
I have a question since you said that. Never asked this before. What did the transition of your mother? What impact? I know you really didn't start the grieving process till they both had transitioned.
Mhm.
But when you have people giving you inspiration or trying to give you hope,
Mhm.
and then you have a conversation with me and I shift you into the what if,
Mhm.
what does that do to your mindset with your dad? Does it shift you into a place where you almost starts to grieve somebody possibly that isn't transitioned yet
Mhm.
because of what has happened in the past?
I didn't grieve, but the fact that I went through the death with my mom and dad were married over 40 years at the time, so they were one. And right after my mom died, my dad was out of here. He was ready to go. And my brother and I had an intervention because we were doing what they call alternative measures of healing.
Okay.
And my dad's cancer was regressing. He was getting
Okay.
better. But after my mom died, he started going back to old ways to put himself in harm's way so that he could die quicker.
Okay.
And my brother and I had a conversation and was like, I said, Dad, you don't even have to speak. I said, you don't want to be here anymore. He shook his head, no. I said, I can't even say I understand because you knew my mom longer than us.
Hmm.
But I said, Dad, it's too soon for me and Dwayne to go through this again. Please give us more time. And he granted us more time. He granted us a year and a month, a year, a month, and 3 days. And he died following my mother's death. So I didn't even think about grief because he made it known like I don't want to be here.
Hmm.
And because I dealt with that with my mom, I respected that. I respected the fact that my dad doesn't want to live without his wife.
Okay.
Yes, I'll be hurt. I'm devastated. But I truly respected the place that he was at because I think looking back even with my mom's situation, she was dying, yes. She had cancer, yes, and she had lost so much weight. The day before she died, she said, take a picture of us. I was like, Mom, take a picture.
Okay.
I have a headscarf on, I look a mess. She's like, no, take a picture of us. So in the photo, I'm holding her, um, and she's looking at the camera with a smile on her face, and I just have my eyes closed. My mom transitioned, she died the next day.
Okay.
And when I look back at the picture, I said she knew.
Okay.
She knew and she wanted something to leave me with. And I also think, it's been 10 years since my mom died, 9 since my dad died. I'm at a place also where I believe a person has a choice
Hmm.
when it comes to death. And I believe with my mom, she thought it was too much for myself, too much for my brother to take care of the two of them because she would always say, this is too much for you. This is too much for you because literally I'm getting like 15 minutes of sleep here and there, but it didn't feel like too much. If I had to do it all over again, I would. It didn't feel like too much. I didn't feel like I was losing sleep. But she said, "This is too much for you." And I think because she felt it was too much for myself and my brother taking care of both of them simultaneously, the both of them having cancer, and it was a schedule. And I felt like she thought it was too much for us, and she chose to leave. I honestly believe that. Because when it came to my dad, his choice was, I want to leave. And he decided to give us a year. Mind you, my dad was doing well.
Okay.
And I found out maybe a year after he died, I went to his sister's house and she said 6 months before he died, he came to the house to let them know he would be leaving soon. And he was doing well at the time, but he said he didn't let us know, my brother and I, he didn't let us know, but he
Okay.
let them know that I'm going to be leaving soon.
I think it's really powerful. I don't think, listening to both of them, your mom and your dad. So we have one individual who we want to make sure we don't grieve over, and we're doing all we can so she won't transition. But she's grieving the fact
Hmm.
that you have to do all of this. You and your brother have to take care of her. I think the powerful thing is that when I say deal with grief, and the choice you say your dad made, I think we lose how much he's grieving. And I think a lot of times when people are around people's bedside taking care of people, we get lost in the 15 to 20 to 30 people that may grieve once this person is gone, never realizing how much they're grieving. And there was no one really to help him with his grief.
Yeah.
Um, and during the process of grieving the losing of his wife. And so I believe that it, the way things are situated at times, he allowed you a moment to plan your grief,
Mm.
but extend his own. That he now this year and this month he has to continue to grieve the woman who was always by his side, the woman whom he loved, and oftentimes we lose, I think, focus of the person that's there. What are they going through?
Yeah.
How much we make these terms? Oh, I'm glad you don't have to suffer anymore. But what does that mean? Like,
Exactly.
is it just a physical thing, or the fact that they're sitting there watching their daughter and their son cry and watching the sadness, seeing the sadness? Nobody knows you like your mother. And so you can go, oh, I'm fine, but it grieves her that you are sad. And so when I look back at 10 years, that's just how time flies, because I was actually the one that did the service.
Right.
And it doesn't seem like 10 years, but it also lets me know the impact of grief, because it's been 10 years. And me personally, it almost feels like it was maybe
Right.
a year ago, 6 months ago.
Right.
And then your dad right behind that for 9 years. I wonder sometimes, how how do you grieve with the expectation of having to grieve somebody else again? I know your dad postponed and helped you, but grief is still there. And so what does that look like for somebody who goes, I have her situation. I lost my mom, or I lost my dad, and now I'm getting ready to lose another loved one. What does that look like when you're already grieving
Mhm.
and you have to go through this process again?
Mhm.
Um, what advice would we give? Um, what we say to somebody? Because your mom is enough
Right.
for most people, and here it is, dad is soon.
Yeah.
What advice would you give somebody um,
To deal with grief, to
to
deal
deal
with
with it?
that, the expectation of that.
Yes. How do
It's
how
like
do
I don't even know if I really have the right words for anybody because everyone's individual. Everything is case by case. Like for me, I wish I had someone to help me at that time. And when you mentioned my dad going through his own grief process,
Mhm.
what I know now is like I wish I was in position to offer him that.
Yes.
I was his baby girl, I was his daughter. All I'm doing is taking care of him, trying to make sure that he's okay, that he's comfortable. But I never stopped to have those conversations
Mhm.
with him. And I think a lot of us run away from that. We run away from talking about the situation because we think, oh, it's too hard for them, or maybe it'll bring up too much sadness for them. But I wish I knew then what I know now to give him that space and opportunity to open up and talk and discuss my mom. One thing I will offer as advice for people going through a grief situation is talk about it
Yes.
because it's such a release to be able to talk about it. For me, sometimes it was hard to talk about it, not because I didn't want to. I found that when I would talk about it, the conversation would switch and it's no longer my grief. Now we're talking about the other person's grief where I
Hmm.
just shut up. I'm just quiet. And after I'm quiet and I hear the other people, whatever it is they have to say, no one ever comes back to say, well, what were you saying again? It's
Hmm.
just, so it's like maybe they needed that moment to express and to release. So I learned to just, and I would be mindful of who I would have these conversations with. But for a long time, it just stayed to myself, where what I wound up doing was journaling
Okay.
and I would write. I would write. When my mom died, I would write every day. It's just like God, I would say God was just pouring into me because I'm not a writer.
Okay.
God was just pouring into me. And it was just me expressing my deep, profound love for my mother, my thankfulness, my gratefulness, my gratitude to my mom. Where it came a time when one day I didn't write and I started to feel guilty, like, I forgot to write today. And then I had to take that pressure off of me
Okay.
because I don't want to put myself in a position to feel like, oh, I did something bad.
Absolutely.
Because I'm very mindful of how I think. I didn't always think like that, but I'm very mindful of the self talk that I
Hmm.
do with myself. And I'm like, if you wouldn't say that to someone else, don't say it to yourself, even in
Absolutely.
your mind. But I would write, and writing was such a release for me. It was therapeutic because, okay, I didn't have anyone to express to, but I'm still letting it out.
Absolutely.
Because one thing I also found out, if you hold all this energy of sadness and grief in and you don't find the outlet, it's gonna find an outlet in one way or another, whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's diabetes, whether it's sickness, whether it's a form of depression where you have to be on medication,
Hmm.
whether it's a psych ward. If you don't let this energy out, it's gonna find a way out on its own. So I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to write, and I also had the opportunity to travel.
Okay.
Travel. I've traveled outside of the country, and I did it oftentimes on my own. Now looking back, I'm like, you went all these places by yourself, not a care in the world. And I think because subconsciously it's like, oh, whatever happens, happens. My mother and father are dead. Now that's selfish because I still have a brother and I wasn't mindful of, his worry of me being across the world. But it was like I had blinders on, like, I just need to get away. This is my therapy to get away from that space of sorrow. Being in a position and a place I've never experienced before, people I don't know, just a different space. It cleared my head quite a bit.
You said you said something that I think is important. You said when you would talk to people and then kind of switch. I think what happens for some people is some people don't have the capacity
Mm-hmm.
to handle your grief, and after you help them, so it's just the magnitude of grief. So you're speaking to someone possibly that lost a friend, and you say all the right things, you give them the comforting words, and they're fine. But now you need somebody to help you, and they're sitting there going, I don't know how to help you,
Mm-hmm.
because your grief is at a level I've never experienced. And so they get quiet. And I don't know if you should say you were being selfish. I hear you speaking, and I know you say, well, I have my brother and I don't have a care in the world. Were you being selfish, or or did the grief teach you something to live? Was it
Mm.
simply I don't care, or I'm going to live each day because at some point grief has taught me that life is short.
Mm-hmm.
Um, don't take anything for granted,
Mm-hmm.
and so sometimes it's just I'm living.
Right.
Um, and when you said journaling, I think that that's amazing, and I encourage people to do that too. It doesn't put you in a box, but it allows you to share and to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It's no doubt, it's proven medically that if you don't deal with grief, grief deals with you.
Mm-hmm.
It affects people's immune system. And sometimes people don't even know why they're sick and things of that nature. But also, it allows you to be in a place. Usually, people try to restrain their grief, how they're going through a mourning process based on who they're around.
Mm-hmm.
Culturally, we're taught be strong. You need to be strong for Dwayne.
Mm-hmm. What does
Dwayne
that
needs to be
mean,
strong.
right?
Yeah, like um,
I can't
do
even be strong for myself at this moment. What are you talking about? Yeah.
and the problem with that, there's two problems with that. So you have a mother, especially people. I had a young lady who was grieving really bad, and she goes, "I'm trying to be strong," and she's the one that lost her mother,
Mm-hmm.
and so she's trying to be strong for individuals, her children, who really didn't have that relationship like that with her mom. Maybe one or two of the children, but the one that's grieving the hardest is her, and so she's walking around trying to be strong for them. The problem with that is, like you said, what does that mean? Be
Mm-hmm.
strong for who? I tell people, you don't need to be strong for anybody, because in the process of grieving, there is no such thing as being strong. You grieve the way you grieve. Everybody's situation is different, but you also have to be careful of what you're teaching the people that are looking to you.
Mm-hmm.
As children, we grow up. That's what I've always heard. Be strong, especially from a male's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The whole us being having able to have any emotional intelligence. It's be strong for your family. Don't let this person see you crying, and you're really just pushing grief to the side. You're not really dealing with it. You're doing something that necessarily is not helpful, and at some point it becomes overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the writing piece of it is a powerful thing because it allows people to share and just say what's on their mind. They don't have people to stop them, to interrupt them. I've heard people say the craziest things to people. Oh, you're still grieving that?
Yeah.
It's been 5 years, 10 years. You're still crying over that?
Right.
What does that mean?
Mm.
Like, I also believe when we talk about grief being the normal reaction to unexpected loss, it also it matters what that loss is. And so sometimes if somebody goes, "Oh, I lost a job," yeah, if you crying over losing a job, maybe somebody can be, and that's still not being sympathetic. But you have a new job now, you have a better job. Well, people don't walk around getting a better mother, and
Exactly.
and we have to look at grief when people lose some things unexpectedly. Can they be replaced? And some things cannot,
Mhm.
and people cannot.
Mhm.
So the whole notion of people coming up with these myths, if you will, be strong, stay busy, all of these different things are not helpful to me. They just, at some point, you're trying to postpone something that's inevitable.
Mhm.
So um, I know it's been 10 years since mom, 9 years. Does it get easier?
I don't know if the word is easier.
Okay.
Maybe the word is manageable.
Okay. I agree
Um,
with that.
Manageable. And I had gotten to a place where I tried to make sense of their death,
Okay.
and I chose to take their death, which in turn was my pain, and turn it into purpose,
Okay.
so that it would be not in vain. Like I would feel like their death was not in vain. Their death meant something. Where because they were sick, I was put in position to learn about different healing modalities to help people.
Okay.
So since that time, I've been in position to help people that are sick, um, help them find ways to get well.
Okay.
So when they come back to me with a good report, it's like the tears just automatically start flowing.
Okay.
And I always say, thank you, mom and dad, for your sacrifice,
Okay.
because it's because of what you've gone through that I've learned so many different ways of healing, so many different ways of thinking differently. And I attribute it all to mom and dad. And I attribute it all to my pain, where you do have a choice. When you're going through grief, when you're going through pain, you have a choice of what you're going to do with it. Either you're going to, which I wanted to do, stay in the bed, under the covers, in darkness. Don't call me. Don't come see me. Just leave me. Let me be. I
Okay.
wanted to be in that space, but because right after my mom died, dad needed me, I wasn't able to be in that space, which
Okay.
hindsight was a good thing for me, because I don't know how deep I could have went. Like I could have, I don't know. I can't say what I could have did, but
Okay.
thinking how I think and knowing the connection I had with my mom,
Okay.
it could have gotten really bad. So
Okay.
I'm grateful I didn't have that time to just wallow in my sadness, but I found ways to be productive, and I found ways to turn that grief and sadness into something positive so that I won't die in my own sorrow. Not only because it's
Okay.
not good for me, but because I also have family members that look up to me. I have
Okay.
family members that depend on me. And also, that's not how my mom and dad raised me, and that's not what they would want for me. So I was mindful of that. You had mentioned before, as far as people saying, be strong and
Mhm.
all those things that people say, I started to correct people because I would
Absolutely.
get offended.
Hmm.
And then I said, well, they're coming from a space of they are trying to help. They don't know that what they're saying is offensive, possibly. So I started saying, if they say be strong, I said, what do you mean by that? And they would choke up because
Hmm.
they didn't have a response. Or if they would say things like, joy comes in the morning. Ma'am, I'm sorry, what? What are you
Hmm.
talking about? The morning came, I'm still sad. What are you
Hmm.
saying? Where I just started questioning what they were saying so they would think twice before they speak, one.
Okay.
And then I would say to them, if you don't know what to say nothing. Just give me a hug. Just say
Hmm.
something I really don't know what to say, but I'm here if you need an ear. I don't know
Okay.
what to say, but can I give you a hug? But don't say cliche sayings,
Hmm.
especially if you can't back it up. So it wasn't to make people feel uncomfortable. It's just
Hmm.
to make people conscious of you're not helping the situation, and now you're making me feel a little ways toward you, and I don't want to feel this way toward you. So it's better to say nothing than to say something and you don't know what you're talking about.
I agree. The awareness is
Mhm.
something, because a lot of times people think they're helping and they're hurting.
Mhm.
I've had people say those same things to me. Even as a person who preaches the gospel, um, I've heard people go, "Joy cometh in the morning." What does that look like?
Mhm.
What joy is coming? I think people take that out of context. That's a different preaching moment. I think what you need to do is almost, in a sense, like you said, just cry with somebody when they cry. mourn with them when they mourn, and sometimes just your presence.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to say anything, and a lot of it's shown in cultural, a lot of it's shown in habits and what people were raised. I find that a lot of people come around and they say a lot of cliche sayings, but most people that walk up to us have not dealt with grief.
Right.
They don't know what to do with it. And when you say back to them, well, what do you mean by that? You tap into the grief they have, and everybody's just walking around with masks on. And
Mm.
just, um, no, I stay busy, and they really haven't dealt with their grief. And so we
Mm-hmm.
have a bunch of people at times trying to help other people with something that they're not really even aware
Yeah.
to help themselves with. So
Yeah.
I agree. You have to be careful what you say to people. I've had somebody put their hands on my shoulder and say, you know, God loved her best. Um, God doesn't make mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so is at the funeral for my grandmother, and those words, like you said, they incited me a little bit. They made me upset in a moment that I'm sad. But you have to be careful because those cliche sayings don't always come over well.
Right.
I did a funeral for a young lady who lost her daughter in a fire. How can those words be helpful to her? He doesn't make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Joy cometh in the morning. I, I lost my baby. In a
To a
sense, this
fire at
fire,
that. Mm-hmm.
um, somebody made a mistake. And so I think people open up a whole different can. And it's kind of why I said to you that day when we were sitting there, I go, well, what if? Man has, um, at times, man and women, they think they're doing good, but they act like, or they try to seem like they have all the answers, and nobody does.
Mm-hmm.
And I just needed you to hear that. Like, they could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mind you,
you
that
know,
was hard to hear.
I'm sure
Because I thought you was on my side. You knew my mom was
no,
gonna be okay. And it's like, what?
it was hard for you to hear, but it was hard for me to say.
Mm.
I surely didn't want to say it because everything in me wants to stay on this side.
Mm-hmm.
But it is also the voice that speaks to me saying, well, preparation, which gets me back to sometimes people have to prepare. And preparation, sometimes you talk about helping people through the transition. And your
Mm-hmm.
purpose now is I want your grieving process to be the best it can be for you.
Mm-hmm.
It can be manageable. And I now know how to manage that. And I want to
Mm-hmm.
help you manage it correctly. You said you help people and do the transition. How? How do you help
I've helped
people?
people that were actually dying
Okay.
in their transition. So since my mom died, I've been in a position where I can sense people are gonna die,
Okay.
crazy enough, before they die. Like with my dad, when I brought him home from the hospital, massaging his arm, and then all of a sudden it's just like, whoosh, and it was like, Dad's not gonna be here tomorrow. I'm like, what?
Wow.
And sure enough, the next day he transitioned. But because of that still voice in my ear, he had a beautiful transition.
Okay.
So since I didn't know, I called my family members, his sister, my brother, his sisters, my brothers, and had them be a part of his homegoing service, so to speak. He died at home. My father loved to sing. We sang. I don't sing, but I sang
Okay.
that day. I held his hand all through the night. I talked to him all through the night. I told him how much I love him, how much we appreciate him, how all is forgiven. He did well, job well done. So he left here knowing that he was loved, he was forgiven, he was appreciated. And then it came a point where I mentioned his wife, my mom, who he referred to as Sweets, and I said, "You see Sweets, Dad?
Hmm.
Don't you see that light?" I said, "It's okay for you to go to the light. It's okay for you to go be with your Sweets. We'll be okay." And then at that time, my brother came over, and my brother started crying. And you
Okay.
could feel like all of a sudden my dad was doing this, and you see the tears rolling down the side of his face like he was trying to hold on for my brother. And then my brother said, "You know what, Dad? It's okay. You could go be with Mom. I'll make sure, Letitia's good. We'll be okay. You could go." And slowly but surely, he started to ease out. and he transitioned and went on. And then I had two aunts that had died also.
Okay.
And I was in a position to just tell them similar things, how they are loved and how it's okay for them to leave when they're ready. And then just recently, my grandmother, my mom's mom, died 2021 at the age of 95. And when I went to see her, I'm laughing, I'm talking with her. And then all of a sudden, it's like, grandma's not going to be here tomorrow.
Hmm.
And it's like, it's a blessing and a curse because it's like, what do I do with this information? How do I hold this? This is the last extension of my mom. What do I do with this? So what I did was I wanted to have a moment, a memory. So I put my camera up, I put record on, and I'm just talking to her, telling her how much she is loved, how much she is appreciated, just loving on her. And she just looked, she gave me this look as if she was looking through me and at the same time thanking me that it was okay to release her. And I knew, like I stayed with her for a long time, and it's like I knew in my senses that the longer I stay, the longer she's holding on.
Okay.
And the longer I'm not allowing her to be free, even though I said it's okay to go. So I did leave, and about 6 o'clock in the morning, I did get the phone call that she had transitioned. And that's how I help people that are dying or about to die transition,
Okay.
deal with I guess the afterlife, if you want to call it. I have no idea what the afterlife is like,
Okay.
but I believe it to be beautiful. And I think I believe it to be beautiful. Backtracking to my mom, when my mom transitioned, we use the word transition a lot because we don't want to say died. So I'm going to use the correct word.
Okay.
When my mom died with a smile on her face. So I knew it was okay for her to leave at that time. And the reason why I said that is because when I was 16 years old, she told me how she was in the bed and she could sense like her spirit leaving her body. And she said she's like, I can't even put into words how good I felt. It's like, I just felt so overwhelmingly good. It was bright. It was so bright. She was like, it was beyond white, the color that I saw and how good I felt and how loved I felt going toward this light. And
Okay.
she said, I saw my body in the bed. And then I just kept going toward the light, feeling even more love, more strength, happier. And she said, all of a sudden she remembered, wait, Dwayne and Letitia need me. And she
Hmm.
said, the moment she thought that, she entered her body again.
Okay.
So I had that to hold on to. So when my mother died at home also,
Okay.
dying in my arms, I didn't know my mom was dying until she actually was dying in my arms. That moment she did a little cough.
Hmm.
And when I looked at her, that's when it hit me like, oh, this is happening. This is really happening. So with my mom, she's such a blessing. She was a blessing. I lost my thought though.
You were just talking about as far as the transition piece of it when your mom, you shared her with the out of body experience and her coming
Right,
back.
right. So when I was 16 and my brother was a few years older than me, like I said, she said when she saw her body and when she remembered that my brother and I needed her, she entered back in her body. So when she died this time, not when she died this time, when she died and she died with that smile on her face, the first thought that came to me was, oh wow, she saw that light again. She saw that
Hmm.
light again. My brother and I are older now. We're adults now. And she knew that was okay for her to leave at this point. Yes, we'll miss her tremendously. It hurts that she's gone, but we're grown-ups now. So it's okay for her to go toward the light. So that was my saving grace, honestly. The fact that she
Okay.
shared that with me when I was 16, that was my saving grace. And the fact that I literally saw the smile on her face as she left this world. So that helped me keep my sanity together.
I think um I think that's amazing. A lot of times when I sit with individuals, the healing process when it comes to grieving, I believe grief, the normal reaction to the unexpected loss is we get caught in between a stage of healing. So when I was saying the planning or the preparation piece of it, there's different stages of healing. And usually I tell people there's always the pre-contemplation. So we don't use it when it comes to losing a loved one. But the pre-contemplation and the contemplation is simply, this could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we go through life as if, or ignoring the reality that it could and will happen. And then there's a contemplation of, well, it could happen, and it's about to happen. And so a lot of times we get caught up when people tell people, oh, it's going to be okay, or this person is going to be healed. We force people sometimes, I believe, in a place where they skip pre-contemplation and contemplation, and you throw them right into preparation.
Mm.
And usually preparation doesn't work for them effectively, because the preparation for you to try to heal and preparing the service for the person you didn't think was leaving,
Mm-hmm.
um, is overwhelming. And so when someone can pre-contemplate, I may lose a job, you start applying for another job, and then you go, okay, they said we may have layoffs. The contemplation is here. I already got my resumes in. I got another offer letter. But when it comes to loved ones, we go, oh, I don't want to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't want to deal with that right now. And then the person leaves, and now you have to prepare. And the grieving process is difficult because you have to prepare to take action. And that's you being intentional about dealing with your grief. And people go, well, I'm preparing the service. I'm not preparing to deal with this. And they shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So listening to you share with your mom, the stories with your mom and your dad, I think one important tool that I don't even know if you and your brother even realize the power is, in your own special way, you grieve together.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people get isolated. I tell people after I do a funeral, the repast, people stop calling, and everybody kind of goes off into their own way of grieving. And we come to know the wrong way. So they're being strong. I don't want to call her because I'm going to start her to crying. She may make me cry. But you and your brother have a way of coming together, understanding, but actually helping each other through the process
Right.
that you and your brother have been managing each other. I'm sure you have good days and vice versa. And on those days, you kind of come together. But most people have that myth of just be isolated. Um, and it'll do that to you. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do anything. But it's a good thing when there is somebody that is there, somebody to encourage you, to help you get through the process,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
grief, like you said, it's managing. Life is not the same once you lose this person. What does that look like?
Right.
Um, I've had people go, well, am I still a daughter because I lost the two loved ones I had? And I also noticed you said something, and you're right about it, especially when it's people that are not of a particular faith. The transition piece, a lot of times people do use it because they don't want to say the person died. But from a faithful aspect, they hold on to that they believe they transitioned somewhere. Um, but I do know that overall, we've got to be intentional about how we deal with it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a powerful thing that you found the purpose. And your purpose is so big because you're helping everybody that you can, that is going through what you went through, and you're trying to make it easier for them. And we don't have a lot of people doing that.
Right.
A lot of
Right.
people don't know how to do it. A lot of people stop living, but you were just traveling everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I said it could never really be looked at as selfish. I believe you needed to do all of that to get you right where you are now.
Like that was my survival tool
And I
in a
believe,
sense. Yeah.
and I believe it was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes we have to heal outside of the surroundings that we got hurt in.
Yes. Yes.
Um, we make that mistake if it's domestically. You can never heal where you were hurt. And I
Right.
think that traveling, getting into the new space, you had no triggers around you except for
Mm-hmm.
just the emotional loss. But
Mm-hmm.
the physical triggers are out of your way. And I believe that's also helpful too for some people, that you have to change the scenery. You can't stay in the same place. You can't stay around the same people. You can't do the same things. And so,
You definitely have to change your surroundings and your environment. That makes a huge, huge difference because you are who you hang around.
absolutely.
And being in different cultures around the world, it just opened my eyes to a brand new way of thinking, a brand new way of living, just a different way of moving. Because
Mhm.
when you're in this one space, in this one bubble, there's a whole world around you that you haven't experienced and that you don't know. So you are what you
Mhm.
experience. So it was therapeutic for me, one, because I was in isolation, really. And I did need it, but it was a different isolation. It wasn't isolation where I'm under the cover in darkness. It was isolation where I'm in this whole big world by myself.
Okay.
So it was therapeutic for me because I got to experience different cultures. I did mission trips. I got to experience different people's pain
Okay.
and what they experience, and see how people handle grief, even on a different level. Grief that has nothing to do with death, but grief that has to do with, I have to flee where I live because people are trying to kill me,
Okay.
when I did the mission trip. So it was a good experience for me to get away and do that. I know you mentioned about how we deal with children
Hmm.
sometime when it comes to grief. So I recently had the opportunity to do a death doula workshop.
Okay.
And when we were, the partner that I was working with at the time, we had a meditation piece. So
Now, Dev Doula, explain that.
so a death doula is a person that helps an individual that is dying deal with the process of grief,
Okay.
the process of them dying and transitioning their final wishes, how maybe it's a vigil, how they want to be laid to rest. And there's also a person that's there to help the family cope
Okay.
with the fact that their loved one is going to die.
Okay.
And I had the pleasure of meeting this woman that was from, I forgot where she was from, but when I did the workshop, everyone was from all over. I had no idea people from other countries came to this workshop. And I met this lady where she said she didn't know that death was a situation where people had to be so sad,
Hmm.
because the way she grew up, she said death was always talked about. Death was always a part of
Yes.
life. Like, we live and we die. And she said, I never experienced it until I was around my friends and they're all sad because someone died. And I'm like, why are you sad? And they were so offended by her because she said such a thing, but she wasn't exposed to death being a bad thing. Her parents talked about death. They talked about this one dying. They were exposed to death as far as going to funerals and
Yes.
preparing and talking about good memories. So she said it wasn't a bad thing. She didn't experience it being bad until she was around other people.
Hmm.
And I said, that's such a blessing for a child to grow up that way, to know what love is, to know what life is, but also to know that there's such a thing as death.
Yes.
So if we all had the opportunity to grow up like that, we wouldn't be in a place where we're so sorrowful, where we don't want to live anymore, or we want to go into a state of depression because our loved one died. But the way she expressed and explained it, it was like such joy to it, where they were able to be a part of the ceremony, a part of the service, and also the person that was actually dying, if they knew they were dying. It wasn't so much a bad thing. It was a sad
Yes.
occasion because, we're departing from our loved ones, but it was understood that this is a part of life.
Yes.
And I said, wow, that's so beautiful to experience death in that state of mind, in that mindset. I said, imagine if we were in a culture where we can express death like that.
That is, listening to you talk, our definition of grief is it's a normal reaction to unexpected loss.
Right.
Other cultures, things you've experienced in travel, what they actually have done is made grief normal.
Hmm.
We have a tendency of making it abnormal because we don't know how to deal with it. So
Yeah.
I see them with these kids coming. Here's the pre contemplation. We talk about death, it's going to happen. So that phase of healing for them is already out the window. We know it's going to happen.
Hmm.
When you're sitting there, end of life doula, helping these individuals, especially those who already have this pre contemplation that death is something that happens, that's their second stage that they're
Hmm.
dealing with. So it's an easier transition for them to manage because they just have to prepare and now go into action of how they're going to live life going forward.
Hmm.
And so they actually take the definition that we use to help people and what we're trying to help people with,
Hmm.
and they just make it normal.
Right. Right.
And everybody makes everybody's grief normal in a sense, but in a bad way when you start comparing people's grief.
Yeah.
But they're just going, listen, it's not a bad thing. It happens, and we expect it to happen. And these children grow up. After you've been, what do? We shelter them. We don't want them to go.
Mm-hmm.
But for most of these kids and people who grow up in these cultures, it's a normal thing. And here is what's so powerful when you say that, when I even think about you sharing the situation with your dad, you were able to, when you can normalize grief, then you can really celebrate the life of the loved one that is leaving. A lot of times people are sitting at the funerals and they're lost. How am I
Yeah.
going to do this? They're crying. And we call it a celebration of life, but nobody's celebrating.
Right.
And and then there are the people who have the guilt that didn't pick up the phone, didn't call, weren't there. And so now they have a guilt of not celebrating the life while they were there. So they feel like they have nothing to add in the ceremony. But if we can normalize the grief, it's expected, and that death is not a bad thing. It's ironic that it's a bad thing, especially when you talk to people of faith, depending on their faith, that it's a bad thing when that's the only thing we're promised is that that will happen. So, but when you sharing that, it's a good perspective, and I think you needed that to help you manage because of the circle. I believe you changed your circle as opposed to your circle changing you.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone around you, joy's coming, and I going through the same thing and not really dealing with the grief. But you've lost your mom. It's been 10 years. I've lost mine. It's been 20. But that's just comparing.
Yeah, yeah.
Because at some point it'll be 30 years for the individual, 20 for you. But the managing piece of it is accepting. Um, and I don't know what it looks like from the end of life doula, where you're actually dealing with the person that is grieving, that is leaving. Um, but I always say this to people, and it's no different than what I said to you, so I didn't want you to take any offense. I've been around a bedside, and everybody is joining hands and they're praying, and everybody is praying for healing. And I always just pray for the will of God to be done, or whatever somebody's faith is, that that would be what has been orchestrated. Because sometimes we have 10 people around the bed praying, but we never know what the person laying in the bed is praying for.
Mm-hmm.
And then they pass away, they die, and people go and they're mad. And I always ask them, the only way you get to be angry is if you knew for a fact
Right.
what they wanted. And whether it was, when you look back at your mom, yes, the sadness and the anger that she's gone, but she didn't want the burden on you and your brother. She didn't want to be in this capacity. And she got a taste of what she was transitioning to. Then there's your dad. I'm
Mm-hmm.
holding on for you guys, but it's killing me because I want to go see Sweets,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm staying here for you guys. And once you really look at the life of the person, celebrating their life and what they wanted, I think that also helps people deal with their grief and can normalize it.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
I would ask you a final thought for somebody that is struggling, not managing well, a final thought of what you would say to that individual.
Well, I could share with them some of the things that I've done when I, was at wit's end, which I said journaling was one.
Okay.
Support groups are good also.
Okay.
Finding like-minded people in the same situation. One thing I want to backtrack though.
Okay.
Sometimes when people are in the same situation as you, say they lost a mother, I lost a mother.
Hmm.
The one thing I try to teach people when they're having conversation, oh, I know how you feel. You don't know how I feel. Yes, you lost your mother, I lost my mother, but it all depends on the relationship we had with the people. You have no
Absolutely.
idea of the relationship I
Absolutely.
had with my mom. I have no idea of the relationship that you had with yours. So instead of saying, oh, I understand or I know how you feel, no, you don't. What you could say is, I remember how it felt when I lost my mom.
Absolutely.
But don't
Yes.
say you understand my pain because you never could truly understand my pain because you don't walk in my shoes.
Hmm.
So that's something to be mindful of. But advice I would give to someone that is struggling, With grief, definitely find um, a support group,
Okay.
someone that you can talk to and feel free with. Because a lot of times, us that are dealing with grief, in actuality, sometimes we don't need advice. We don't need someone to talk us till we're blue in the face. What we need is an ear.
Yes.
We need an ear that'll listen to let us just release, cry, say whatever it is we have to say. And you'll be amazed at how people feel a little bit lighter, just a little bit,
Hmm.
but it's just what they needed for the moment, an ear. So definitely, I would say journaling is one, finding a safe space to speak, whether it's a support group, whether it's according to your faith, whether it's an individual, definitely finding someone that you can release all these things that you're feeling so you don't keep it bottled up.
Hmm.
I would also recommend traveling
Okay.
outside of your comfort zone. And if you're not in a position to travel, do things outside of your comfort zone. One thing I recommend is that you keep moving.
Absolutely.
Keep moving. If you fall, keep falling forward, but keep moving. Don't stay in a position of getting stuck where you stay stagnant. Because for a while, I was stagnant.
Okay.
For a while, I was comfortable being stuck and comfortable being in isolation until I said, Letitia, you was in the same spot last year. Letitia, what steps have you made to move forward? You're stagnant. You're
Hmm.
stuck. You're doing this, this, and this, but at the same extent, you're doing it as a distraction, but you haven't made any movement.
Absolutely.
It looks like you're busy. It looks like you're doing all this stuff, but you haven't made any progress, true progress, what I would consider progress.
Okay.
So I realized that I was stuck. Where now, I have a heart to do something, and something is urging me to do something rather than coming up with excuses or I'm fearful. I said, I'll do it afraid. I'll do it afraid. So I would encourage people to do things outside of their comfort zone and find purpose within their grief. And when I say find purpose within your grief, say the situation that you're going through, use that as fuel. Like, this is making me so angry. Use that fuel, that anger that you have, and turn it into something positive. Does that make sense? You understand what I mean?
Yes.
Like, all that energy you have, instead of having it bottled up, suppressing it and doing nothing with it, or if you're doing something with it that's negative, turn that situation around. If you like to paint, do canvas, do classes. If you
Hmm.
like to ski, go skiing. If you like to draw, if you like to dance, do something with your talent or with your gift to fuel your pain into something positive.
I agree, and I think I would add only and kind of piggybacking off of you, it's a moment to reevaluate your own life.
Mhm.
How are you living? Are you getting the most out of your own life?
Mhm.
Because grief, if it teaches you nothing else, it teaches you that life is short.
Mhm.
Um, and none of us know when our last day will be. And so, how do you live your life? And especially something that you also said when you were sharing that, people saying, "I know how you feel." It is one thing that we know: we never tell anybody how they feel.
Right.
Um, I would just say you want to take time to be intentional about reevaluating your life and finding, writing, traveling, whatever it may be, support groups, a counselor, whoever it may be, so you can tell them how you feel and not somebody trying to tell you.
Yeah, that's a good one. On that note, thank you for joining us here at Ushered into Healing.